We were made to be courageous. We were made to lead the way. We could be the generation that finally breaks the chains.
I'm also looking forward to talking to Jacob Hill, a West Australian pastor from the northern suburbs of Perth, who went in his younger life on a life of crime, street gangs and drugs, to heading up Teen Challenge. He's written about his life story in a book called Kids at War. Jacob, welcome to the show.
Thanks.
It's a delight to have you here. Your story is one of going almost full circle, really. You mentioned you had a great upbringing. Well, what went wrong?
At an early age, well, at the age of 13, my dream was to play hockey for Australia, and my knees went at the age of 13, and my parents also separated. From my parents separating, I got the message that if they really loved me, they wouldn't have broken up. So I believed that they didn't love me. So I started looking for that acceptance and that approval in other places, and ultimately in the wrong places.
And that led to things. When I've read something of your story, I think I was a bit shocked at the age at which you got into some things, really. Because I think people sometimes have their perceptions that drugs and these kind of things happen at a certain age. How young were you when all this sort of went wrong and began?
I started using drugs and selling drugs at the age of 13, and by the age of 16 I was injecting heroin.
And how did you get introduced to it? Was it that somebody was just there and you were in the wrong place at the wrong time? And just try to help me understand that.
No, it was the people I was hanging around. I was actually hanging around them for quite a long time before I ever tried the drugs. They were using them around me, but I didn't have a desire to use them. I wasn't curious about them. But it was just, the more I stayed with those guys, the less threatening they seemed, the drugs seemed. And after a little while, I actually started to feel like I didn't really fit in because everyone else was doing the drugs, but not me. So it was, initially it was to fit in that I tried them.
So tell us about Kids at War. What is that all about? Kids
at War was actually the name of the crew that I used to be in and eventually led. And I thought it was a catchy title for a book. I thought it was a very apt description for the story I was telling.
Yeah, and the At War takes a different flavour, doesn't it, then, really, as people read it? And the book's been written so that it's accessible, isn't it, to young people? Yeah,
well, the title's actually Kids at War, Winning the Battle to Grow Up,
yeah.
Which I think sort of sums up the book. And it's been, like, the book's written... the reason I wrote the book was specifically to show young people that they don't need to try drugs and the party life, that they're not missing out if they don't do that, but also to help parents understand what young people go through. So many parents have no idea the challenges and the pressures that young people face every single day, teenagers, what they go through at school in their peer groups.
And you talked, didn't you, about trying to find God through that period of time and how that search can be there, and eventually you do come to a place where it's real for you.
Yeah, well, I actually grew up in a Christian home, and I had a faith in God as a child. Through the challenges that I faced at the age of 13, my parents separating, my knees going, God stopped being, I hate to say it, but stopped being convenient as far as what was going on around me. I knew that I had a choice to make, either my Christian faith or the acceptance of my friends, my peer group, and I chose the acceptance of my friends.
If you've just tuned in, we're with Pastor Jacob Hill, and he's been telling us a little bit about his background, a Christian background, but finding himself mixed up. But you got to a place where it was almost like hitting a wall. You didn't think there was any way out. You've used those kind of words when you're right. What's that experience like? I
believe the lie that once you're a drug addict, you're always a drug addict. And for me, the experience of being a drug addict, it got to the point where I would have rather been dead than keep living how I was living. Hopeless is the only word that I think fits completely, and it's horrible.
And you did find yourself in a kind of hospital experience, you know, out of contact with the world, in a coma, as it were. But let me turn forward a little bit to Teen Challenge, introduction to that. How did you get introduced to Teen Challenge?
I'd heard Jade Lewis speaking at a presentation on drugs 3 years earlier, and fast forward 3 years, my mum had said to me, Jacob, I don't want to talk to you again until you're in rehab. Now, I sort of thought rehab doesn't work. Once a drug addict, always a drug addict. But I thought I'll give it a go, firstly, just to keep her happy. And secondly, I thought, well, I'll detox, you know, go 3 weeks, I'll detox, and then when I get out, all the drugs will be cheap again, and I'll actually be able to feel them. Now, Teen Challenge is recommended, and at that moment, I remembered this girl speaking 3 years earlier, and she'd said that Teen Challenge was a God place and that God had changed her life. At the time, I thought, you know, this she's lying. You know, once a junkie, always a junkie. I thought she's either never really was on drugs or never really had a habit or still was. But it was at that moment I thought, God, if you're real, I need you. You can change me. And if you do that, I will serve you for the rest of my life.
Were there some moments in that journey when you really thought were very much life-transforming, some particular moments?
As I was going through the Teen Challenge program, there was a couple of really critical moments where I'd say are defining moments in my life. One of the main ones was forgiving my dad, because I'd blamed him for a lot of my problems. When I was able to actually forgive him for, so I'd been saying if he'd never done this, then I wouldn't have ended up where I ended up. But the fact was, I ended up where I ended up because of my choices. When I was able to own my choices, I was able to forgive him, and it set me free from...
Now, you're seen a little bit, I suppose, really, as a kind of ambassador for Teen Challenge now in an Australian context. What would you say to parents? Because you're now a parent yourself, so you understand the responsibilities that come with that. What would you say to a parent who's really in a real panic about their own children at this particular time?
If their child's already mixed up in drugs, they need to learn. We do a program called Solutions specifically for parents. It actually teaches parents to help their young person come to the end of themselves, to actually see that they do have a problem. For parents whose young person is not already addicted, get to know them, develop an open dialogue with them, and be someone that they can approach.
And that's an interesting phrase, come to the end of themselves. Do you think that's important to get to that point before you can actually make this new beginning?
It's often necessary. It shouldn't be, but often it is. We often kid ourselves that we've got the solution, we know the way out, we can stop whenever we want, there's no real problem. And when we actually realise that we have a problem and come to the place where we're wanting to do something about that, that's when people can get set free from...
And you use this word like almost kidding yourself, you know, that actually it's possible to kid yourself. I can get out of this, I can stop the drugs anytime I want, and this drugs is not going to do this to me. I mean, do you think there is a kind of hiding away behind some kind of facades like that?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Delusion is the word we use, delusion and denial. It's they're the things that need to be broken down before any person's going to actually reach out for help.
Now, you're involved in this ministry, you're motivating people, but the way you talk, what about your own plans for the future?
My plans for the future are, firstly, my home is my most important ministry, my wife and my children. That's my first priority. But then from there, my goal is to keep doing what I'm doing, but on a larger scale. I think it's important to keep growing in what we do, keep reaching more and more people with the message of the gospel, with the good news.
And do you think that this, I know you're a pastor in Perth, do you think that this ministry adds to your normal pastoral ministry as well?
It definitely gives it a depth. It definitely gives it, firstly, a different group of people that we're able to reach, but also a level of empathy for people going through different experiences. Even not related to drugs at all, but related to despair. Well,
we're definitely, Jacob, glad that you made the trip from Perth to join us here in the studio. And most importantly, the book you've written is a helpful tool for people, to hand to people, and it's easily written. Thanks, Jacob, for coming on the show to share your life and your passion for troubled young people.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
We were made to be courageous.